Imagine a city built not toward the sky but away from it, floor after floor sinking into the dark, as if survival once meant disappearing from the world above. Derinkuyu does not only ask who carved stone beneath Cappadocia, it asks what kind of fear, memory, or loss could make generations accept life below the earth as safer than daylight. The 1-8, story city someone dug underground who built Derinkuyu, and what were they hiding from? Most cities announce themselves by rising. They lift walls, towers, roofs and windows into the open air, as if human life has always wanted to be seen by the sky. Derinkuyu asks us to imagine the opposite. Beneath the dry hills of Cappadocia, rooms descend into the earth in quiet layers, not as a palace for display, not as a monument meant to impress a traveller from far away, but as a hidden architecture of survival. The first thought it leaves behind is unsettling. A community once decided that safety might not be found by building higher, but by vanishing lower. That idea matters because it does not begin with fantasy. It begins with a real landscape, a real material, and real human bodies trying to stay alive inside a difficult world. Cappadocia, in central Anatolia, is a place shaped by ancient volcanic activity. Over long periods of time, ash and stone settled into soft rock that could be carved more easily than hard mountain stone. Wind and rain shaped valleys, cones, and hollow spaces, while human hands learned to enlarge what nature had already begun. In many places across the region, people cut churches, homes, storage rooms, and shelters into the rock. Derinkuyu belongs to that wider habit of living with stone, not merely standing on it, but it pushes the habit deeper. It turns the ground itself into a layered refuge, and that is why the mind returns again and again to the same quiet question: what kind of pressure makes people choose the underground? For early humans, shelter was never only comfort. Long before cities, long before written records in this region, the human body carried a simple weakness. It needed warmth, water, rest, protection from animals, protection from weather, and protection from other groups when conflict came close. Our ancestors did not survive because they were the strongest animals in the landscape. They survived because they read danger, remembered places, and returned to spaces that could shield the body long enough for another morning to arrive. A cave, a rock overhang, a hollow in the ground, a ring of fire, a wall of branches. These were not dramatic inventions. They were practical answers to the limits of skin, bone, and breath. Derinkuyu stands far later in history, shaped by settled communities and long experience, yet it still belongs to that old human pattern. It is a shelter made deliberate, extended, and organized. The wonder is not that people could imagine hiding under the earth. The wonder is that they created a place large enough for many people, with passages, rooms, storage areas, ventilation shafts, and ways to close off danger from above. Nothing about such a place suggests a single casual act. It suggests patience. It suggests repair. It suggests hands returning to the same stone across years, perhaps across generations, changing the underground as the needs of the living changed. At the beginning of this journey, it is important not to turn Derinkuyu into a solved riddle too quickly. The underground city was used in known historical periods, especially in a region crossed by empires, armies, merchants, religions, and migrations. Yet its deeper beginnings are more cautious territory. Some stories try to give it one clean origin and one dramatic enemy, but human history rarely keeps itself that simple. A place like this can gather many uses over time. It can begin as storage, become shelter, serve families in danger, protect food and water, and later be enlarged by people who inherited both the space and the fear attached to it. The question is not only who first cut the rock, it is why generation after generation found the dark worth preserving. Above Derinkuyu, daylight still touches the same land. Below it, the earth holds a colder memory. Human beings sometimes built downward because the surface of the world could not always be fully trusted. Cappadocia does not look like a place that should hide a city until the mind begins to understand the stone. The land is dry, open, and quiet, with valleys shaped by wind, water, and ancient volcanic eruptions. Long before people carved rooms beneath their feet, ash from volcanoes settled across this region and hardened into rock that could be cut with tools, yet remain firm when left undisturbed. This material, often called tuff, helped create the landscape of cones, cliffs and hills that made Cappadocia feel half-built by nature before human hands arrived. In such a place, the ground was not simply ground. It could become a wall, a roof, a chamber, a chapel, a stable, or a passage leading away from danger. This is why Derinkuyu cannot be understood apart from its environment. The city below was not dropped into the earth like an idea from nowhere. It grew from a landscape that made digging possible, and from people who learned that stone could behave like a second skin around the community. For human beings, this matters deeply. Our earliest story is not only a story of walking upright across open land, it is also a story of finding edges, hollows, shade, shelter, and cover. The body is vulnerable in open space. It tires, chills, overheats, hungers, and becomes visible. A place that can reduce exposure can become more than shelter. It can become a way for memory to survive. Cappadocia offered that possibility. Above ground, it gave fields, paths, and villages. Below ground, it offered material that could be shaped into protection. The same land that allowed people to farm and travel also placed them where movement across Anatolia brought contact, trade, religion, and sometimes violence. Central Anatolia sat between larger worlds, where armies, merchants, languages, and beliefs could pass from one horizon to another. A community living there might benefit from connection, but connection also brings risk. Roads can carry grain and goods, but they can also carry armed strangers. Valleys can guide families, but they can also guide raiders. Open landscapes can feed people, yet they can expose them. Derinkuyu makes sense when these truths are held together. Cappadocia was livable, and Cappadocia was not always secure. That double condition is often where human invention begins. People rarely create difficult architecture for one reason alone. They do it when land, fear, habit, and skill meet over time. The underground spaces of Cappadocia likely grew from practical needs already familiar: storing food in cooler rooms, protecting animals, preserving water access, and finding refuge when danger moved across the surface. In the long history of our species, the most important inventions were often not grand at first. They were repeated solutions to ordinary weakness. A fire kept burning, a path remembered, a seed stored, a shelter improved, a stone room deepened. These small acts became traditions, and traditions could become architecture. Derinkuyu belongs to that slow process. Its depth impresses us now, but its beginning may have been less dramatic than the finished form suggests. A family might cut storage space. A village might extend a shelter. Later, people might connect rooms, deepen shafts, and leave a place that seemed to grow downward with each generation's need. The landscape allowed it, but the landscape alone did not build it. The builders needed social order, shared labour, and trust to make underground space useful instead of dangerous. A tunnel is not safe because it is hidden. It must have air. It must have roots people understand. It must protect water and food. It must allow the old, young, and frightened to move without confusion. Cappadocia reveals something larger than geology. It reveals a human answer to exposure. Derinkuyu began with earth that could be carved, but it became meaningful because people kept asking the oldest practical question of all: where can life continue when the open world becomes unsafe? Derinkuyu is difficult to hold in the mind because it does not behave like one simple category. If we call it a home, we must explain why a home would need stone doors, narrow passages, and deep levels where daylight could not reach. If we call it only a hiding place, we must explain why it contains signs of planning that go beyond a hurried refuge. If we call it a city, we must remember that it was not a city in the usual sense, with streets under the sun, markets open to the wind, and public spaces meant to gather people in full view. It was a place where ordinary needs and extraordinary danger seemed to have met in the same rock. That is why the first layer of the mystery is not only historical, it is human. The underground rooms suggest food had to be stored, animals sheltered, air guided, water protected, and movement controlled. These are not the concerns of legend, they are the concerns of bodies. Every person who entered such a place still needed to breathe, drink, sit, sleep, wait, listen, and trust that others knew the passages. Beneath the surface, survival becomes intimate. A community cannot pretend to be larger than its needs. It must know where the water is, where the grain is kept, where the children can stay still, where the animals can be held, and where danger might press against a blocked entrance. In this way, Derinkuyu carries a very old human memory inside a later historical form. Since the beginning of our species, people have lived between exposure and shelter. Open ground offered movement, hunting, gathering, farming, and connection, but it also made the body visible. Shelter reduced danger, but it also demanded knowledge, cooperation, and sometimes sacrifice. The underground city sharpened that old balance. It allowed people to disappear, but only by accepting darkness, closeness, and dependence on a shared plan. The question of whether Derinkuyu was used for daily life or emergency refuge may not have one clean answer, because human places often change with time. A storage space can become a shelter can become a network can become a remembered refuge long after the first reason for digging has faded. When later generations inherit a place carved by earlier hands, they inherit more than rooms. They inherit decisions already made in stone. They may deepen a passage without knowing the first person who began it. They may repair a wall because their parents did. They may close a stone door because the shape of the passage tells them it was meant to close. In this sense, the underground is not only architecture, it is a record of repeated concern. Above ground, history often leaves names, rulers, armies, and dates. Below ground, it leaves more silent evidence: the width of a corridor, the placement of a shaft, the coolness of a storeroom, the way a passage narrows where a defender would want it to narrow. These traces do not speak like a written document, and they should not be forced to say more than they can. But they do show that Derinkuyu was built around practical fear, not abstract imagination. The fear may have changed its face across centuries. It may have been war in one period, raiding in another, political instability in another, religious pressure in another, or simply the inherited knowledge that surface life could turn unsafe quickly. The human origin of such behavior is older than Cappadocia itself. Our ancestors survived by noticing patterns: where predators moved, where storms gathered, where water returned, where shelter could be found again. Later settled people used different tools and lived in different societies, but the underlying skill remained the same. They prepared for danger before danger arrived. Derinkuyu begins, then, not with one final answer, but with a disciplined uncertainty. It was not merely a home, not merely a bunker, not merely a curiosity under the soil. It was a human response to a world where safety could not always be trusted to remain above ground. To understand Derinkuyu, the stone must be seen almost as a silent participant in the story. Cappadocia was shaped by ancient volcanic eruptions that spread ash and fragments across the land, leaving behind layers of rock that were very different from hard granite or solid marble. In many places, this volcanic stone could be cut with patient tools, especially when people followed natural weaknesses in the material. Yet once carved and left dry, it could hold its form well enough to become walls, ceilings, rooms, and corridors. That balance is important. If the rock had been too hard, a large underground settlement would have demanded a level of labour almost impossible for ordinary communities to repeat over time. If it had been too weak, the passages would have collapsed, and memory would not have trusted them. Cappadocia gave people a rare middle ground, a landscape that invited cutting, but still resisted falling apart. The result was not only Derinkuyu. Across the region, people carved dwellings, churches, storage places, pigeon houses, and shelters into cliffs and hillsides. Derinkuyu belongs to this larger habit of using the earth as architecture, but it carries that habit inward and downward until the ground becomes a hidden world. This is where geology meets the oldest human instinct. From the beginning, human beings survived by learning the behavior of materials around them. A branch could become a tool, a stone edge could cut, clay could hold water, fire could change food, bone could become a point. Shelter was also a material lesson. Our bodies were not made with shells, thick fur, or natural armour. They had to borrow protection from the landscape. A rock face, a cave mouth, a hollow, or a windbreak could become the difference between exposure and another day of life. Much later, in Cappadocia, settled people were not simply hiding in nature's shelters, They were improving them, extending them, and giving them order. Volcanic tuff made that possible in a way that shaped the imagination of the people who lived there. When the land itself can be carved, a wall is no longer something one must always build from separate stones. A room does not always need timber beams. A roof can be the mountain above your head. This changed what safety could look like. It also changed what preparation could mean. A community could create cooler spaces for food, darker spaces for storage, and deeper spaces where the surface world became distant. Yet the material never removed the need for intelligence. Soft stone can deceive the careless hand. A tunnel must be placed where the rock can bear weight. A chamber must not be too wide without support. A shaft must bring air without opening danger too easily. Even the act of digging downward requires a memory of direction, because underground space can confuse the body. The eye loses the horizon. The ear hears echoes. The skin feels still air. The mind depends on known paths. For the earliest humans, a shelter was useful only if people remembered how to enter, how to leave, and how to guide others through it. Derinkuyu keeps that ancient rule in a more complex form. Its builders and users had to understand not only stone, but movement, breath, storage, fear, and the habits of a group under pressure. The volcanic rock explains how the underground city could be physically made, but it does not explain why people continued to value it. For that, the material must be joined to history. Cappadocia was not an empty geological museum. It was a lived landscape, crossed by human roots and shaped by communities that needed food, water, faith, labour, and defence. The same rock that made homes and churches could also make hiding places. The same hill that looked quiet from above could contain a route downward. Derinkuyu is therefore not a miracle separated from the land. It is a human answer drawn directly from the character of Cappadocia itself, soft enough to enter, strong enough to trust, and deep enough to hold fear without immediately showing it to the sky. Cappadocia was not only a place of unusual stone, it was also a place where life on the surface carried two different meanings at once. The land could support villages, fields, animals, paths, and religious communities. Yet it also stood in a region where movement across Anatolia brought uncertainty. Central Anatolia has long been a bridge between larger worlds. People, goods, soldiers, languages, beliefs, and rumours could pass through or near it, sometimes slowly, sometimes with force. For a settled community, that kind of position is never simple. Contact can bring trade, tools, marriage, stories, and new ways of worship. It can also bring taxation, raiding, war, and sudden demands from powers larger than any single village. Derinkuyu begins to make sense when we stop imagining the underground as separate from daily life above it. The same surface that gave grain could also expose the grain. The same roads that brought visitors could also bring danger. The same valleys that guided movement could guide men who did not come peacefully. In a dry landscape, food storage mattered, water mattered, animals mattered, seeds mattered. A harvest represented months of labour, and the loss of stored food could threaten far more than comfort. It could weaken a family through winter, or leave a village dependent on uncertain help. This is a very old human problem. Since our earliest beginnings, survival has depended not only on finding food, but on protecting access to it. A gathered root, a hunted animal, a stored seed, a skin of water, a sheltered fire. Each one was valuable because the body cannot wait forever. Human beings became skillful at remembering places where life could continue. Later farming communities inherited that same bodily truth in a new form. Fields tied people to land, but also made their labour visible. A farm cannot run away. A village cannot vanish as easily as a small wandering group. Once people settle, they gain stability, but they also become easier to find. This is one of the quiet costs of civilization. The more food a community stores, the more there is to defend. The more houses stand in one place, the more memory gathers there, but the more vulnerable that place becomes when violence approaches. Cappadocia's underground shelters offered an answer shaped by local conditions. They did not remove danger from the world. They reduced what danger could easily reach. Grain could be kept cool. People could move below the surface. Animals, tools, and water access could be protected for a time. A doorway could be hidden or blocked. A passage could slow an intruder. These choices were not signs of panic alone, they were signs of a community thinking in advance. Human survival has always favored those who could imagine trouble before trouble arrived, not through prophecy, but through memory. A storm returns. A hungry season returns. Conflict returns. Footsteps on a road may mean trade one year and fear the next. In Cappadocia, where soft volcanic rock made carving possible, people could turn repeated memory into physical space. The environment gave them a rare option, not simply to build another wall above ground, but to create a second layer of life below it. This second layer was not meant to replace the sunlit world. People still needed fields, animals, neighbours, and open air. The underground only makes sense beside the surface, as a shadow form of the village, prepared for moments when ordinary life had to contract. That contraction is important. Derinkuyu was not a fantasy of living beneath the earth forever. It was a practical response to a landscape where daily stability and historical danger could exist side by side. To understand it, we must picture not only dark corridors, but the world that made those corridors necessary. A region of carved stone, dry valleys, stored harvests, passing powers, and human bodies still carrying the ancient need to find shelter before the open ground becomes unsafe. An underground city needs more than soft stone. It needs a reason strong enough to make the work worth repeating. A small storage room can be made for grain, a short tunnel can be cut for shelter, and a hidden chamber can protect tools or food for a season. But Derinkuyu suggests something larger than a single practical convenience. Its depth and connected spaces point toward a long relationship between people, land, and danger. The rock made digging possible, yet possibility alone does not create a place that reaches so far below the surface. Someone must decide that the effort is useful. Others must agree. Later hands must repair what earlier hands began. Children must learn the routes. Adults must remember which passages lead to air, water, storage, and exits. And the whole community must trust that the underground is not merely a hole in the earth, but a prepared answer to trouble. That is why Derinkuyu should not be imagined as a sudden invention. It is better understood as a landscape of choices that may have accumulated over time. In human history, the most durable shelters often begin with a modest need. A hollow becomes a storeroom. A storeroom becomes a hiding place. A hiding place becomes connected to another space. A passage is widened, a shaft is deepened, a stone door is shaped, and slowly the earth begins to hold the memory of repeated danger. This pattern reaches back toward the earliest conditions of human life. Our ancestors survived not because they controlled the world, but because they learned how to prepare for its changes. They noticed where water remained, where cold gathered, where animals moved, where fire could be protected, and where the body could rest without being too exposed. Derinkuyu belongs to a far more settled and historical world, but it preserves that same practical intelligence in stone. It shows that human beings did not stop needing shelter when they built villages. In some ways, settlement increased the need for planning. A village has fields that cannot move. It has stored harvests that attract attention. It has elders, children, animals, tools, and sacred objects that cannot be carried away at a moment's notice. When danger approached, running into open land might not protect what gave life its continuity. The underground offered a different kind of answer. Not escape into distance, but withdrawal into depth. Still, depth required skill. People had to understand how to carve without destroying the roof above them. They had to leave enough stone to support weight, shape narrow passages that could be defended, and create shafts through which air could travel. They had to think about the movement of many bodies in darkness, because a refuge that confuses its own people can become a danger by itself. These details suggest organization, not chaos. They suggest that the underground was part of a wider social habit, a way of preparing that depended on shared knowledge, repeated teaching, and calm familiarity with the stone. No single generation needs to explain the whole place. Derinkuyu may have been used, altered, and expanded by different communities across different historical moments. That cautious view is more honest than imagining one secret builder and one final purpose. The underground city is powerful precisely because it refuses to fit into a simple story. It was shaped by volcanic rock, but also by geography. It was shaped by fear, but also by food storage, water, animals, and ordinary life. It was shaped by history, but also by something older than history, the human need to make a fragile body less exposed. When these forces met in Cappadocia, a city could turn downward. Not because the earth demanded it, and not because mystery alone explains it, but because the land, the pressure of the times, and the memory of human vulnerability made the dark useful enough to keep alive. To walk through Derinkuyu in the mind, it helps to move slowly, as a human body would have moved there. The underground is not a grand hall first, but a sequence of narrowed choices, a passage bending away from light, a room cut from pale volcanic stone, another opening lower down, and then a sense that the surface has become distant. The spaces identified in the underground city include storage rooms, living areas, places for animals, ventilation shafts, wells, and passages that connect one level to another. These details matter because they keep the story close to ordinary survival. A hidden city is easy to turn into a legend, but grain, water, air, animals, and movement bring it back to the body. If people entered Derinkuyu during danger, they did not enter as symbols. They entered as breathing human beings, with hunger, fear, fatigue, children to steady, elders to protect, and supplies that could not be lost. A storage room below ground speaks of harvests that had to last. A stable or animal space speaks of warmth, smell, noise, and the hard practical truth that people needed animals not only when life was calm, but also when the surface was unsafe. A narrow corridor speaks of defense, but also of the difficulty of moving many people through darkness without panic. The deeper we imagine the place, the clearer it becomes that Derinkuyu was not simply dug for hiding. It was arranged so that hiding could remain livable for a time. That difference is important. A hole can conceal a person for a moment. A planned underground refuge must support a community long enough for danger to pass. Human beings have always faced this distinction. In the earliest shelters used by our species, protection was never only a roof. It was the placement of fire, the memory of an exit, the nearness of water, the ability to hear danger, and the shared understanding of who slept where. Derinkuyu belongs to a much later world, with settled villages and carved stone architecture, yet it reflects the same old rule. Shelter must work with the body, or it becomes another threat. The walls of Derinkuyu do not tell us the names of the people who cut them. They do not give us a single date that solves the whole question, but their arrangement suggests repeated use, adjustment, and practical knowledge. A chamber placed in cool stone can protect food better than an exposed room above. A shaft can pull air through darkness, and remind us that even the most hidden place must stay connected to the world outside. A well or water access can mean the difference between refuge and trap. These are not dramatic clues, they are quieter and more reliable. They show that whoever used Derinkuyu understood survival as a system, not as one heroic act. The underground had to hold many needs at once. It had to hide people, but also guide them. It had to close itself against danger, but not close itself against air. It had to protect stored food, but also allow people to reach it. It had to feel known enough that, in a frightening moment, people would not lose themselves inside the very place meant to protect them. This is where the intelligence of ordinary communities becomes visible. The builders did not need to leave a written explanation for every room. The rooms themselves show the pressure of use. They show that life below ground required memory, discipline, and trust. A person could not survive there alone in the same way a group could survive there together. Someone had to know the routes. Someone had to watch supplies. Someone had to calm the movement of people through tight spaces. Someone had to understand which passage mattered when a door closed behind them. Seen this way, Derinkuyu is less like a single secret and more like a carved record of cooperation under pressure. It reminds us that the human story began with vulnerable bodies learning to survive together, and even in a complex underground city, that beginning still remains. The deeper Derinkuyu goes, the more the body becomes the measure of the architecture. A room underground is not useful because it is hidden alone. It is useful only if a person can breathe there, stand there, turn there, wait there, and leave again when the danger has passed. Every carved space had to answer the needs of lungs, hands, feet, eyes, and memory. Air was the first silent requirement. Without moving air, depth becomes a trap. Ventilation shafts in an underground city are not decorative details. They are signs that the people who shaped and used the place understood that life below the surface still depended on the surface. Breath ties the hidden world to the open world. Even when people withdrew from daylight, they could not withdraw from the atmosphere itself. Water carried the same truth. A refuge without reliable water can protect people only briefly. Wells and protected access to water suggest planning beyond a moment of panic. They remind us that whoever entered these spaces may have expected to remain long enough for thirst to matter, long enough for fear to become routine, long enough for the darkness to need order. Food storage adds another layer. Grain, dried goods, tools, and perhaps animal products all required spaces that could be kept relatively stable. The coolness of stone could preserve what the open air might spoil or expose, but storage also created responsibility. A community underground had to know how much it had, where it was kept, and how to distribute it. Hunger can make a shelter fragile from within. These practical concerns reach back to the oldest human condition. Our ancestors did not survive merely by finding food once. They survived by learning how to return to resources, how to protect them, and how to share them within a group. A remembered shelter with a remembered supply was more powerful than strength alone. Derinkuyu carries that ancient logic into carved stone. Movement was another problem the builders had to solve. Underground paths cannot be too confusing for those who belong there, yet they can be difficult for those who do not. Narrow passages could slow an intruder, but they also required calm movement from the people inside. Darkness changes the way the body thinks. Without the horizon, people depend on touch, sound, memory, and the presence of others. A child could become frightened by echoes. An older person might need help along uneven stone. Animals could make noise, resist movement, or add heat and smell to an already confined place. The underground had to hold all of this without collapsing into disorder. In such a place, survival was not only physical, it was social. People needed rules, habits, and trust. They needed to know where to wait, when to stay quiet, how to move through a passage, and which routes should remain clear. The architecture of Derinkuyu, therefore, speaks not just of digging, but of discipline. Its spaces suggest that fear had been translated into usable form. A blocked entrance, a shaft of air, a storage room, a well, and a narrow corridor are all different answers to the same basic human problem. How can a fragile group remain alive when the outside world cannot be controlled? This question is older than any city. It belongs to the first shelters, the first fires protected from wind, the first remembered caves, and the first communities that understood that safety depends on cooperation. Derinkuyu does not remove fear from the story, it gives fear a shape. It shows human beings doing what they have always done in moments of pressure, turning weakness into planning, planning into space, and space into a temporary promise that life might continue below the ground. Derinkuyu becomes more impressive when it is treated not as a sudden marvel, but as evidence of repeated labour. Stone does not arrange itself into a refuge because one frightened moment demands it. A moment of fear may send people underground, but a place like Derinkuyu requires something slower. People returning to the same passages, widening them, cutting chambers, closing weaknesses, and teaching the next generation how to move through what the previous generation had made. This is one of the calmest clues the underground city offers. It was not only an act of digging, it was an act of maintenance. Every shelter that lasts must be cared for. A blocked passage must be cleared. A wall that crumbles must be repaired. A shaft that brings air must remain open. A storage room must stay dry enough to protect food. When a carved place survives as a useful refuge, it usually means that people kept finding reasons to preserve it. Derinkuyu therefore speaks less like a single sentence and more like a long conversation between the living and the stone. One group may have cut rooms for storage, another may have joined spaces, another may have shaped defensive doors or narrowed a passage, another may have remembered the place because danger had once come from above. None of this requires us to claim that we know every name, date, or first intention. The safer truth is more patient. The underground city appears to carry layers of use, and layered use is one of the most human things archaeology can reveal. Human beings began with no permanent walls of their own. They borrowed protection from the landscape, then slowly learned to alter the landscape so it could protect them better. A natural cave became a shelter because people knew how to use it. A camp became safer because people returned to it. A storage place became valuable because food could outlast the day. In that long story, Derinkuyu is not separate from our beginnings. It is a late and complex expression of the same ancient habit, remembering a place of safety, improving it, and passing that knowledge forward. The traces below Cappadocia do not need to tell a dramatic legend to matter. Their power comes from practical repetition. The underground city had to be understandable to those who depended on it. A person entering in fear could not rely on mystery. They needed familiar turns, known rooms, known wells, known shafts, known closures. The architecture itself suggests a community that had practiced survival before it urgently needed it. That kind of preparation is rarely created by impulse. It belongs to groups that have learned, through experience or inherited memory, that the open world can change quickly. History above Cappadocia brought many possible pressures across centuries: conflict, raiding, political uncertainty, religious tension, and the need to protect supplies. But beneath those changing historical forms sits a deeper pattern. The human body remains fragile, and groups survive by organizing that fragility. Derinkuyu shows fragility organized into space. Its rooms do not boast, its corridors do not rise toward glory. They turn inward, downward, and sideways, making use of darkness as defense and cool stone as storage. The result is not a monument to power in the usual sense. It is a monument to caution. It reminds us that some revealing human constructions were not made to be admired from far away. They were made to keep ordinary life from ending too easily. A family waiting beside stored food, an animal kept alive through a dangerous season, a well protected from those outside. These quiet images come closer to the heart of Derinkuyu than any exaggerated myth. The underground city asks us to respect the intelligence of people who prepared without leaving a simple explanation behind. They carved, repaired, remembered, and trusted the earth because survival sometimes depends not on conquering the surface, but on knowing when to step beneath it. In Derinkuyu, the most important signs of planning are not the most dramatic ones. A visitor may first remember the depth, the darkness, or the strange feeling of passages dropping beneath ordinary ground. But the quieter details carry the stronger evidence. Air had to move. Water had to be protected. People had to stay alive, not for a single breathless moment, but long enough for a danger above to change, pass, or become understandable. This is why the ventilation shafts and wells matter so much. They turn the underground from a hiding place into a living system. A concealed chamber can save someone briefly. A network of chambers, supplied with air and water, suggests a community thinking beyond the first instant of fear. The people who shaped and used Derinkuyu did not merely ask how to disappear. They had to ask how disappearance could remain survivable. Breath is the first boundary that no refuge can cross. A wall can block an enemy, a stone door can close a passage, and a tunnel can remove people from sight. But lungs still belong to the open air. Even under the earth, the body keeps making demands. It asks for oxygen, for space to rest, for enough calm to keep fear from turning into confusion. In the early story of humankind, shelter was always limited by these same needs. A natural cave was helpful only if smoke could leave, if people could still hear or sense danger, if water was near enough, and if the group could enter and leave without trapping itself. Derinkuyu belongs to a later and more organized world, yet it repeats that older human lesson in a deeper form. Safety is never just separation from danger. It is the careful protection of the conditions that make life continue. A ventilation shaft is therefore not a small technical feature. It is a reminder that the hidden city still depended on the surface. It also hints at a kind of patience in the planning. Shafts had to be placed, kept open and understood. They could not simply exist as accidental holes. The same is true of water. In a dry region, water is not background. It is one of the central facts around which life arranges itself. A well connected to underground spaces could help protect access when surface movement was risky, but it also required care, knowledge, and control. If too many people withdrew below without water, the refuge would fail quickly. If air stopped moving, fear would become physical. If routes to supplies were unclear, darkness would turn organization into disorder. These practical limits make Derinkuyu more human, not less mysterious. They show that whoever used the place had to think in terms of bodies gathered together. Children, elders, animals, and adults all breathe the same limited air. They all need water. They all become vulnerable when movement slows, when sound echoes, and when the daylight world is no longer visible. The underground city could only work if people trusted its internal order. That trust may have been built through repeated use and inherited familiarity rather than through a single grand design. Human beings have always depended on remembered places. At the beginning of our story, survival often meant knowing where shelter could be found before night, weather, hunger, or danger arrived. In Cappadocia, that old memory became carved infrastructure. Instead of a cave mouth found by chance, there were cut shafts. Instead of a stream reached in the open, there were protected water points. Instead of a temporary hollow, there were rooms and passages shaped by hands that understood the cost of exposure. Derinkuyu does not ask us to imagine people living easily beneath the earth. It asks us to imagine people making difficulty manageable. The air shafts and wells do not prove every purpose, every date, or every fear. They do something more careful. They prove that the underground was planned around real life. In the dark, survival was not an idea. It was breath moving through stone, water held close, and a community trying to keep the fragile body alive where daylight could not follow. Beneath the earth, the body does not become less human. It becomes more honest. In daylight, people can be distracted by distance, by horizon, by the movement of roads and fields, but underground every need comes closer. Breath is heard. Thirst is felt sooner. Darkness changes the pace of walking. A small sound travels through stone and returns altered. The body begins to measure the place not by beauty, but by whether it can endure. Derinkuyu must be understood through that bodily experience. If people used it during danger, they were not entering a silent museum of carved rooms. They were entering a space where fear had to be managed through order. The first need was air, but air alone was not enough. People needed enough room to sit or sleep, enough water to wait, enough stored food to avoid panic, and enough confidence that the passages would lead somewhere known. In a confined underground world, confusion can become as dangerous as the threat outside. Human beings are social animals, and our earliest survival depended on shared attention. Long before settled villages, a group resting near a cave or rock shelter had to manage fire, sound, darkness, children, tools, and exits. No one survived well by ignoring the needs of others. Derinkuyu carries that same old truth into a more complex human setting. The underground refuge required more than stone cutting. It required social rhythm. People would have needed to move in ways that did not block each other. They would have needed to keep certain routes clear, protect water, control animals, and preserve food from waste. In narrow corridors, the private body becomes part of a public problem. One frightened person can slow many. One careless fire can change the air. One blocked passage can turn a shelter into a trap. This is why the architecture feels closely tied to discipline. The narrowness of a passage, the placement of rooms, and the presence of shafts suggest not comfort in the modern sense, but controlled hardship. Such hardship is not hard to understand if we return to the human beginning. Our species never had the strength of large predators or the armor of other creatures. It survived by sensing danger early, staying together, and making places safer through repeated behavior. A shelter became safe because people knew how to use it. The underground city depended on that knowledge even more strongly. The absence of sunlight would have affected ordinary perception. Time may have been harder to feel, movement may have slowed, voices may have needed to soften. The smell of animals, stored grain, smoke, damp stone, and human bodies would have made the refuge physical, not imaginary. These details should not be exaggerated into misery, but they should not be erased either. Derinkuyu was not a dream of hidden comfort. It was a practical answer to pressure above ground. That answer asked the body to accept darkness in exchange for protection, closeness in exchange for concealment, waiting in exchange for the chance to survive. The people who used such spaces did not escape their vulnerability, they organized it. They created routes for breath, places for water, rooms for supplies, and habits that could hold a group together when daylight was no longer available. In that sense, the underground city reveals one of the oldest compromises in human history. Safety often costs freedom. A wall protects, but it also limits. A cave shelters, but it narrows the world. A city under the earth hides life, but it also asks life to become quiet, patient, and disciplined. Derinkuyu shows that survival was not only a matter of escaping danger, it was the slower work of keeping the human body calm enough, supplied enough, and connected enough to remain alive in the dark. Here, protection was not a feeling alone. It was the steady arrangement of air, water, food, movement, and patient shared trust. The path from a natural cave to a carved underground city is long, but the human reason behind it is surprisingly continuous. A cave offers protection because the earth is already shaped into a kind of shelter. A carved refuge goes further. It means people no longer wait for the landscape to provide safety by chance. They alter the landscape until it carries their memory of danger. Derinkuyu belongs to this deeper transformation. It shows a community using stone not only as a background to life, but as a material that could be taught to protect life. The ventilation shafts, wells, rooms, and corridors were not separate inventions. Together, they made a hidden environment where the body could remain alive while the surface became uncertain. In that sense, the underground city is part of a very old human story. Long before permanent villages, people learned that certain places mattered because they could be returned to. A cave mouth, a shaded cliff, a spring, a dry hollow above a flood path, a place where fire could be guarded from wind. These locations became points of memory. They were not only useful once, they became useful because groups remembered them and taught others where they were. Over time, human survival depended more and more on shared knowledge of place. Derinkuyu is not a prehistoric cave, and it should not be described as one. It belongs to historical Cappadocia and to communities who had tools, social organization, food storage, and repeated reasons to prepare. Yet the impulse beneath it is related to that older beginning. The human body has always needed a boundary between itself and danger. Early shelters borrowed that boundary from nature. Later shelters built it. In Cappadocia, people could do something in between. They could carve the boundary directly into the earth. This makes Derinkuyu feel both strange and familiar. It is strange because few people today imagine a city under their feet. It is familiar because the need it answers is basic. When the open world is not safe, life looks for cover. The important difference is that Derinkuyu turned cover into infrastructure. Air was guided, water was kept close, rooms were arranged, passages were narrowed, entrances could be controlled. These choices made the underground more than a hiding place. They made it a remembered system of survival. A person who entered it did not depend only on courage. They depended on a design that other people understood before the emergency began. This is how human groups have always reduced fear, not by removing danger completely, but by preparing a place where fear can be contained long enough for thought to return. The move from natural shelter to artificial shelter also marks change in responsibility. If a cave collapses, it belongs to the accident of the landscape. If a carved passage fails, it reflects decisions made by human hands. To dig is to accept responsibility for the space one creates. That responsibility may have been shared across many generations at Derinkuyu. One generation could inherit a shaft and keep it open. Another could deepen a room. Another could remember which door closed from inside. In this way, the underground became a form of memory that did not need writing to survive. The stone held the habits of people who had learned that safety sometimes requires preparation in darkness, patience in waiting when danger returned again quietly, and trust in a shared route back toward air. The lesson is not that humans belong underground. They do not. They need light, fields, roads, and air moving freely across the skin. But because humans are fragile, they also need places where exposure can be reduced. Derinkuyu stands between those truths. It is a carved reminder that civilization did not erase the ancient need for refuge. It only gave that need new tools deeper rooms, and a longer memory beneath the ground. The defensive character of Derinkuyu appears most clearly where the underground city stops feeling like ordinary carved space and begins to feel like controlled movement. Some passages narrow, some routes bend. At certain points, large round stone doors could be rolled into place to block access from the inside. These details do not prove a single enemy, and they should not be forced into one dramatic story, but they do show that danger was taken seriously. A storage chamber does not need a closing stone shape to resist entry. A simple cellar does not need corridors arranged to slow movement. The presence of such features suggests that people who used Derinkuyu understood the underground not only as shelter, but as defense. Defense below the earth works differently from defense above it. A fortress on a hill tries to see danger from far away. It uses height, walls, towers, and open views. A refuge under the ground gives up distance in exchange for concealment and control. It does not watch the horizon in the same way. It narrows the possible paths. It makes entry difficult. It asks the outsider to move through unfamiliar darkness while those inside know the turns, the doors, and the places where movement can be stopped. This is a quiet but important shift in human strategy. Since the earliest days of our species, survival has often depended on making danger lose its advantage. A small group could not always outrun stronger bodies, resist harsher weather, or defeat larger forces in the open. But it could choose a better place. It could shelter near rock, build near water, sleep where fire could be guarded, or retreat into a space where the body was less exposed. Derinkuyu carries that old intelligence into a built underground form. Its defensive features remind us that the human body is fragile, but the human group can change the conditions of danger. A narrow passage can reduce the strength of many attackers. A stone door can turn a tunnel into a barrier. A bend in the route can limit sight. Darkness can confuse those who do not belong there. None of this makes the underground safe in an absolute sense. It makes danger slower, and sometimes slowness is enough to save lives. The large circular doors often associated with Cappadocian underground cities are especially meaningful because they are practical rather than decorative. Their value lies in action. They can close, block, separate, and protect. A door in such a place is not merely an entrance, it is a decision point. On one side may be the surface, with its uncertainty. On the other side may be stored food, water, animals, and people waiting in silence. To close that door would not have been a romantic gesture. It would have been a sober human act, shaped by the knowledge that what is preserved inside may be all that keeps a community from breaking. The same logic appears in the narrowness of certain routes. A wide road invites movement. A tight passage controls it. Above ground, power often spreads outward, across fields, gates, and open approaches. Below ground, power can be reduced to a few steps of stone. One person who knows the passage may understand more than many strangers entering it for the first time. That kind of advantage does not require mystery. It requires preparation. We should be careful, however, not to imagine every defensive feature as evidence of one specific invasion or one simple historical moment. Cappadocia passed through many periods of change, and underground spaces may have served different communities facing different pressures. The more honest conclusion is that Derinkuyu was prepared for danger without telling us exactly which danger came first. Its stone doors and narrow corridors belong to a long human habit. When the world outside becomes uncertain, people try to create a smaller world they can understand, guard, and close. Above ground, defense often begins with seeing. A wall on a hill, a tower over a gate, a lookout facing a road. These structures protect by giving warning before danger arrives. Derinkuyu worked by a different logic. It did not try to dominate the horizon. It reduced the horizon to almost nothing. Once people moved below the surface, sight no longer reached across fields or valleys. Protection depended on control, not visibility. A person inside did not need to see far if the entrance could be closed, if the passage could be narrowed, and if the route ahead was known only to those who belonged there. This is why underground defense feels so unlike the defense of castles or city walls. It is not a display of strength. It is a discipline of limitation. Every turn, every bottleneck, Every stone door changes the size of danger. A group of armed strangers above ground may appear powerful because they can spread out, surround, and move freely. In a narrow tunnel, that same force can be reduced to one or two bodies at a time. The passage itself becomes part of the defender's strength. This idea reaches back to a very old human pattern. From the beginning, our species survived by changing the terms of danger. A fragile body in open space is exposed. A fragile body behind rock, near fire, inside a known shelter, or among alert companions is different. The body has not become stronger, but the situation around it has changed. Derinkuyu shows that principle in carved stone. It does not give humans claws, armor, or great speed. It gives them prepared ground. The underground refuge makes the outsider slow down, bend, listen, guess, and move without certainty. It gives the people inside a smaller, more familiar world to manage. That is the core of its defensive logic. It does not defeat danger by meeting it in the open. It makes danger enter a place where the open no longer exists. Narrow passages also affect the mind. A person entering without knowledge cannot easily judge depth, direction, or how many people may be hidden ahead. Echoes can distort sound. Darkness can remove confidence. A bend can hide what comes next. For those inside, the same features may feel less confusing because they belong to memory. A child raised near such spaces, or an adult taught their roots, would understand them differently from a stranger arriving under pressure. Human shelter has always depended on this difference between known and unknown space. A cave familiar to one group can be frightening to another. A path remembered by one family can save time when weather changes. A hidden spring matters most to those who know where to find it. In Derinkuyu, knowledge of place becomes defense. The architecture does not only block bodies, it protects the people who understand it from the uncertainty faced by those who do not. This also explains why underground defense did not require every room to be comfortable. Its purpose was not to create an ideal life below the earth, but to preserve life during moments when the surface could not be trusted. A narrow corridor may be inconvenient for daily movement, yet useful when an intruder must be slowed. A heavy stone door may interrupt normal flow, yet become crucial when closure matters more than ease. The underground world was built around trade-offs. Safety could mean darkness. Control could mean discomfort. Protection could mean accepting less space, less light, and less freedom for a time. These compromises are deeply human. Every shelter, from the simplest windbreak to the strongest fortress, asks people to give up something in exchange for reduced exposure. Derinkuyu asks for a great deal, but it also offers a rare answer. If the surface becomes dangerous, the community can shrink the world until danger has fewer ways to move toward human lives again. The strongest question raised by Derinkuyu is not simply how people moved a stone door or cut a narrow corridor. It is why such preparation felt necessary enough to preserve. A defensive feature is never only an object. It is a memory of possible danger turned into shape. A door that closes from within tells us that someone expected a moment when the inside and the outside would need to be separated. A passage made narrow tells us that open movement was not always desirable. A route that bends away from sight tells us that uncertainty could be used as protection. Yet none of these traces names the danger for us. They do not say whether the pressure came from raiders, soldiers, political change, religious conflict, local violence, or some combination of threats that changed across centuries. That uncertainty should not be treated as a weakness in the story. It is one of the most honest things Derinkuyu offers. Human communities rarely prepare for only one fear. They prepare because experience teaches them that danger can return wearing different faces. One generation may remember armed men on a road. Another may remember the loss of grain. Another may remember a time when faith, language, or loyalty made people vulnerable. Another may inherit the underground simply as something the family knows to use when the surface becomes unstable. The result is not a single answer, but a long pattern of caution. In the oldest human story, shelter also began from repeated uncertainty. Early people did not need to understand danger in abstract terms. They needed to recognize when the wind was changing, when animals were near, when darkness made movement risky, and when a known hollow or rock face could reduce exposure. Over time, memory turned place into protection. Derinkuyu belongs to a later historical world, but its defensive logic still rests on that beginning. It asks what humans do when strength is not enough. They remember, they prepare, they make danger pass through a smaller opening. They take the wide, unpredictable world and reduce it to a passage they know. The people connected to Derinkuyu may not have built or used it because they were afraid in every moment of life. Above ground, they still farmed, traded, worshipped, raised families and lived under the same sky as other communities. The underground mattered because ordinary life can be peaceful for long stretches and still require a plan for the day when peace fails. A refuge does not need constant danger to remain useful. It needs the memory that danger has happened before and may happen again. That memory can outlast the original event. Children can be taught where to go without being told every detail of the first fear. A stone door can remain ready long after the hands that shaped it are gone. A passage can keep its defensive meaning even when the enemy it once slowed has disappeared from history. This is how human places collect time. They hold the behavior of people who are no longer present. Derinkuyu may have served many different moments, because the underground could be reinterpreted whenever the surface became threatening again. To ask what they were hiding from, then, is to ask a question that may have several layers. They may have hidden from violence. They may have hidden supplies from seizure. They may have hidden vulnerable families from chaos moving through the region. They may have hidden the continuity of the community itself: food, water, animals, children, tools, and the practices that allowed life to resume after danger passed. This does not require a dramatic legend. It requires only the cold recognition that settled life creates things worth protecting. From the first shelters of human beings to the carved depths of Cappadocia, survival has often meant guarding the fragile center of life, while the outside world changes beyond control. Derinkuyu does not tell us exactly which fear came first. It shows that fear had been taken seriously enough to become architecture, and that may be the deeper answer its stone refuses to simplify. The question of who first dug Derinkuyu is more difficult than the shape of the tunnels suggests. Stone can be measured, rooms can be mapped, and doors can be described, but the first intention behind a carved place is harder to recover. The underground city did not leave behind a clear written statement saying who began it or why the first cuts were made. Because of that, the safest way to approach its origin is slowly. Some discussions of Cappadocia point toward ancient Anatolian peoples, sometimes including the Phrygians, as possible early users or builders of underground spaces in the region. Other views emphasize later communities, especially in the Byzantine period, when Cappadocia's underground refuges appear to have been important during times of insecurity. These possibilities do not have to cancel each other. A place like Derinkuyu may not belong to one people in one moment. It may have begun modestly, then been enlarged, reshaped, and reused by different communities who found the underground useful for their own needs. That layered explanation is less dramatic than a single secret origin, but it is more faithful to how human places often grow. A chamber cut for storage can outlive the person who made it. A passage made for protection can be widened by later hands. A well, a shaft, or a defensive door can be added when new dangers or new skills appear. Over time, the underground may stop being the work of one generation and become an inheritance. This is important because human history is full of reused spaces. People live in the ruins of earlier people. They repair old walls, deepen old wells, build beside old paths, and give new meanings to places they did not begin. Derinkuyu may be understood in that same patient way. The first diggers may not have imagined the later scale of the underground city. They may have been solving smaller problems, where to keep food cool, where to hide supplies, where to shelter during raids, where to protect animals, where to remain unseen when movement on the surface became dangerous. These are not small concerns. They are the concerns that have followed human beings from the beginning. Long before named kingdoms or carved settlements, our ancestors survived by remembering which places could protect the body. Later societies gave those instincts more organized forms. In Cappadocia, the soft volcanic rock made it possible to turn remembered shelter into permanent carved space. Still, possibility is not identity. The stone can tell us that someone cut it. It cannot always tell us the language they spoke, the name they used for themselves, or the exact fear they carried into the ground. That silence should keep the story honest. It is tempting to give Derinkuyu a clean answer, because clean answers feel satisfying, but archaeology often gives us something slower: patterns, materials, comparisons, and cautious probabilities. The underground city stands in a region where many peoples moved, ruled, worshipped, fought, settled, and disappeared from political memory without disappearing fully from the land. Anatolia has rarely been a closed world. It has been a meeting ground, and meeting grounds gather layers. The question who built it may therefore be partly the wrong shape. It assumes a single beginning strong enough to explain the whole place. A better question may be, who found the underground useful enough to keep it alive? The answer may include early local communities, later villagers, Christian populations of Cappadocia, and people whose names were never written down in a form that survived. That does not make Derinkuyu vague. It makes it human. Many of the most important survival works in history were not made by one famous builder. They were made by ordinary hands repeating a practical lesson until the lesson became stone. Derinkuyu's origin may remain partly hidden, but the human reason for preserving it is clearer. In a land where the surface could feed life and threaten it, people learned that the ground beneath them could become memory, refuge, and defense. A city underground is unlikely to be the work of one moment, because its usefulness depends on more than the first act of cutting stone. A single group can begin a chamber, a village can deepen it, a later community can connect it to another space, add a defensive closure, widen a storage room, or open a new shaft for air. Over time, the place may become larger than any one generation's plan. This is one of the most careful ways to understand Derinkuyu. Its underground form does not need to be imagined as a finished design drawn in advance by one mysterious people. It can be understood as an inherited refuge, shaped by repeated needs, repeated repairs, and repeated memories of danger. Human beings often build in layers because life itself arrives in layers. A house is repaired after weather, a wall is strengthened after conflict. A path becomes wider when more feet use it. A well is deepened when water becomes harder to reach. The same slow logic can apply beneath the ground. One age may value the underground for storage, another for hiding, another for worship nearby, another for defense, another for the simple reason that older people taught younger people never to forget the passage. This kind of growth is not unusual in history. Many settlements across the world carry older foundations beneath newer walls. People reuse what remains useful. They do not always erase the past when they inherit it. Sometimes they adapt it quietly, because adaptation is easier than beginning again. Derinkuyu's depth, rooms, and roots suggest this kind of accumulated human work. It would have required knowledge of stone, but also knowledge of community life, where people might gather, where food could be kept, where animals could be placed, where air must move, and where danger should be slowed. No single feature proves a complete date. No single corridor tells the whole story. The underground city is better read as a long record of practical choices. This connects it to a very old human pattern. From the beginning, our species survived by improving places that had already proved useful. A sheltered hollow used once could be remembered. A campsite near water could become familiar. A protected place could be returned to, cleaned, improved, and taught to children. In settled Cappadocia, that ancient habit took a more permanent form. Instead of remembering only a natural shelter, people could remember a carved system. They could pass down not just the location of safety, but the shape of it. The idea that Derinkuyu expanded across different historical periods also helps keep the story honest. If we give all of it to one people, one fear, or one dramatic event, we may make the story simpler than the evidence allows. But if we imagine many communities using the same underground network because the land, history, and human body kept producing similar needs, the place becomes clearer. A later population did not have to know the first digger's name to understand that a cool room could store food. They did not need to know the first fear to understand why a stone door mattered. They did not need to share every belief of earlier users to recognize that hidden passages could protect lives when the surface became unstable. That is how survival knowledge travels. It often moves without a written explanation, through habit, warning, practice, and the quiet authority of elders. Derinkuyu may therefore be less like a single invention and more like a long human sentence, written by many hands in the same soft volcanic rock. Each edition answered a need that belonged to its own time, yet the deeper need remained older than any empire around it, to keep breath, water, food, and memory alive when the open world could no longer be trusted. The question of who built Derinkuyu may feel as if it should end with a name, but the underground city resists that kind of ending. Names belong to kings, dynasties, armies, and inscriptions. Derinkuyu belongs more closely to hands, tools, inherited habits, and repeated decisions made in a landscape where the same need could return many times. To ask for one builder is to imagine the underground as a monument. Yet it may be better understood as a refuge that grew because different people, in different centuries, kept discovering that the stone below Cappadocia remained useful. A named ruler can order a wall, a famous architect can design a temple, but a place of survival often gathers its makers quietly. One person cuts a room, another deepens it. A family stores grain, a later community remembers that the room is cool, hidden, and close to water. When danger returns, the old space becomes valuable again. The identity of the first hand may fade, while the usefulness of the hollow remains. In this way, Derinkuyu reminds us that some human achievements are collective without being anonymous in a meaningless sense. They are anonymous because ordinary survival rarely receives a signature. This connects the underground city to the oldest pattern of human life. Before writing, before kingdoms, before anyone could preserve a builder's name, people survived by passing on remembered places. They knew where shelter stood, where water gathered, where stone blocked wind, and where the group could wait when the open land became dangerous. Derinkuyu belongs to a much later world, but it preserves that same older logic. Its builders may have spoken different languages across time. They may have held different beliefs, served different powers, and feared different threats. Still, each group could understand the same practical value. The earth could hide breath, food, water, animals, and memory. That shared recognition may be more important than a single identity. It turns the underground into a meeting point between separate lives, separate fears, and the same vulnerable human body. This is why the question of origin should not be abandoned, but it should be reshaped. The first builders matter, yet the later users also built Derinkuyu by keeping it alive. A place can be constructed with tools, and then constructed again through use. Every repair adds meaning. Every reopened shaft renews the intention of the earlier cut. Every generation taught to enter carefully becomes part of the architecture, because without knowledge the underground is only confusing stone. The city below Cappadocia was not simply made once. It was maintained as a possibility. That possibility was the true inheritance. If the surface became unsafe, people did not need to invent refuge from nothing. They could return to a known depth. They could carry supplies downward. They could close a passage and trust that air and water still existed somewhere within the darkness. This kind of trust is slow to form. It requires more than fear. It requires memory tested by experience. Derinkuyu therefore answers the question of who built it in a quieter way than a legend would. It was built by communities who understood exposure, by people who knew the land could be both generous and dangerous, by those who received older spaces and made them serve newer needs. The names may be missing, but the pattern is visible. Human beings are not only makers of monuments, they are makers of continuance. They build places that allow food to last, children to wait, water to remain near, and families to emerge again when the pressure has passed. In that sense, the missing name is not an empty space. It is a reminder that most survival was carried by people history did not record. Derinkuyu may never give us a single founder standing at the beginning of the story. Instead, it offers a deeper human answer. The city was made by many layers of people who refused to let the surface be the only place where life could survive. Cappadocia did not stand outside history, even if its valleys can feel strangely removed from the noise of empires. It lay in central Anatolia, a region where larger powers, roads, armies, merchants, religious communities, and local villages could meet uneasily across long spans of time. This matters because Derinkuyu was not only a structure in stone, it was a response to a human landscape shaped by movement. People who lived above those underground rooms were not isolated from the world. They were connected to fields, trade routes, taxes, rulers, churches, neighbouring settlements, and the changing pressures of states that rose and weakened around them. In the Byzantine world, Cappadocia had deep religious and strategic importance. It was home to Christian communities, rock-cut churches, monastic life, villages, and fortified habits of survival. Yet importance often brings exposure. A region that sits between centres of power can become a corridor for protection in one century and conflict in another. The same road that allows a pilgrim or merchant to travel can later carry soldiers, raiders, or officials demanding loyalty and resources. Derinkuyu becomes easier to understand when it is placed inside that wider motion. It was not simply beneath a village. It was beneath a world where the surface could be reorganized by forces larger than any family could control. Human beings have always had to live between the local and the vast. At the beginning of our story, a small group watched weather, animals, water, and nearby strangers. Later settled people watched harvests, rulers, armies, faith, and borderlands. The scale changed, but the body remained vulnerable. A farmer in Cappadocia still needed food stored safely. A child still needed shelter when adults heard danger approaching. An elder still needed water close enough to reach. A community still needed time. Time to wait, time to hide, time for violence or uncertainty to move past. In the Byzantine centuries, underground spaces in Cappadocia could serve this need because they joined local knowledge with historical pressure. They did not stop an empire from struggling. They did not stop armies from moving. They did not solve religious or political tension. Instead, they created a smaller, protected world where ordinary life could contract when the larger world became unstable. This is one of the quiet truths of history. The people most affected by grand events are often not the rulers whose names remain in books. They are the families who must decide what to carry, where to store grain, how to protect animals, and where children should wait when the sound of danger comes closer. Derinkuyu belongs to that quieter level of history. Its passages remind us that major historical change is always felt through the body. A frontier is not only a line on a map, it is a village wondering who is coming down the road. A religious conflict is not only a dispute in doctrine, it can become a family seeking a place where worship, food, and life may continue. A weakening authority is not only a political event, it can mean uncertainty about protection, taxes, raids, or who controls the next season. In Cappadocia, the carved underground gave people an option shaped by the land itself. They could withdraw without disappearing forever. They could protect supplies without abandoning the fields entirely. They could use darkness not as a permanent home, but as a buffer against moments when daylight became too exposed. This does not mean every tunnel was made for one Byzantine crisis, or that every chamber belongs to one historical fear. It means Derinkuyu must be read as a place where geography and history met repeatedly. The soft stone allowed depth. The lived world gave depth a reason. The Byzantine setting helps us see that the underground city was not outside civilization. It was one of civilization's quieter defenses carved by people who knew that when empires moved above them, survival might depend on the older human skill of finding cover close to home. For many communities in Cappadocia, Christianity was not an abstract belief kept only in books or rituals. It shaped calendars, gathering places, burial customs, painted churches, monasteries, and the way villages understood themselves within a changing world. In the Byzantine period, the region became known for its rock-cut religious spaces, where chapels and churches were carved into the same volcanic landscape that also allowed underground refuges to exist. This matters because Derinkuyu was not only a geological possibility, it was part of a lived society in which faith, land, and danger could become closely connected. A community that stores grain underground may be protecting food. A community that hides families underground may be protecting life. A community that preserves sacred practices in a threatened landscape may also be protecting identity. These meanings can overlap without becoming one simple explanation. It would be careless to say that Derinkuyu was made only for religious persecution. just as it would be careless to ignore the fact that religious communities in Cappadocia sometimes faced instability, pressure, and conflict within wider imperial and regional struggles. The safer understanding is that underground spaces could serve Christian populations in moments when being visible on the surface became risky. Visibility is often the first condition of danger. A church above ground can be seen, a village can be found. Smoke, animals, harvests, and roads can reveal where people are. In human history, those who are vulnerable often learn to manage visibility. This begins far earlier than organized religion. Our ancestors survived by knowing when to stay near open paths and when to withdraw toward shelter, when to make fire visible and when to protect it, when sound helped the group and when silence mattered. Later communities inherited the same bodily wisdom in more complex forms. In Cappadocia, the underground could become a place where people reduced their presence without abandoning their world completely. They did not have to cross a mountain or disappear into an unknown wilderness. They could move beneath familiar ground, close passages, remain near stored food and water, and wait inside a space shaped by previous knowledge. For a Christian village, such a refuge might protect more than bodies. It might protect continuity, children, elders, customs, texts, vessels, tools, and the quiet confidence that life could resume after danger passed. This does not mean we should imagine large crowds living comfortably underground for long periods, or secret ceremonies filling every chamber. The more honest picture is practical and restrained. People may have used these spaces temporarily, under pressure, with discomfort, discipline, and a strong need to keep order. The underground would not have removed fear, it would have contained it. It would have allowed a community to endure a period when roads were unsafe, soldiers or raiders were near, or authority above ground no longer felt protective. In the Byzantine world, borders and loyalties could shift, and local people often carried the cost of those shifts in ordinary ways. A policy decided far away might be felt as a demand in a village. A conflict between powers might become footsteps in a valley. A religious difference might become a reason to hide. Derinkuyu gives physical shape to that distance between great history and small human survival. It reminds us that empires are not experienced only in palaces or battlefields. They are experienced in food stores, water points, closed doors, and dark places where people wait quietly for the surface to become livable again. This connects the story back to the beginning of human life, because beneath every historical label there is still the same fragile body. A believer hiding underground still needs air. A farmer protecting grain still needs water. A child waiting in darkness still needs adults who know the way out. The rock-cut churches of Cappadocia show a landscape shaped by faith. The underground cities show a landscape shaped by preparation. Together, they suggest a society that carved meaning and refuge from the same earth. Derinkuyu was not simply a hiding place for one belief or one danger. It was part of a larger human strategy. When what matters most becomes exposed, people search for a depth where identity and life can remain unbroken. Derinkuyu should not be reduced to a single flight into darkness. Its underground spaces may have served people during moments of danger, but those moments were likely not all the same. A village could use the underground during a raid, then return to ordinary life. Another generation could use it when political authority weakened. Another could remember it during religious tension, or when movement along roads became unsafe. The same carved refuge could answer different fears because its basic purpose remained broad. It allowed a community to withdraw from exposure without abandoning the land that fed it. This is a quieter and more believable way to understand Derinkuyu than imagining one dramatic event that explains everything. Human places often survive because they are flexible. A wall can defend against one enemy and later mark a boundary. A church can remain sacred after rulers change. A storage room can become a shelter when danger arrives. In the same way, an underground city can hold many histories in the same stone. Cappadocia's Byzantine world was full of changing pressures, but change did not arrive as a single storm. It came through years, rumours, taxes, raids, shifting alliances, local conflicts, and the slow anxiety of living where larger powers pass close by. For ordinary people, history was not always understood as an empire rising or falling. It was felt in whether roads were safe, whether food could be kept, whether worship could continue, whether children could sleep without being seen by strangers. Derinkuyu turned those concerns into depth. It did not make the world peaceful. It made the community less visible for a time. That distinction matters. A refuge is not a victory over history. It is a pause created inside history. This connects Derinkuyu to the oldest human behavior. Long before states and borders, early people learned that survival often depended on temporary withdrawal. A group might wait out danger in a cave, move behind rocks during harsh weather, or stay close to fire until morning returned. These acts were not permanent escapes. They were pauses that allowed life to continue. The underground city of Cappadocia gave a settled community a more complex version of that ancient pause. Instead of running far away, people could move below familiar ground. Instead of carrying every resource into uncertainty, they could protect food, water, animals, tools and memory near home. In Byzantine Cappadocia, such a place could be used again and again because the pressures above ground could also return again and again. A road that was peaceful in one season might become dangerous in another. A ruler who offered protection might be replaced. A local conflict might pass, then leave families remembering where to go if fear came back. This repeated usefulness helps explain why underground spaces were preserved rather than forgotten. They belonged to a rhythm of risk and return. People went down because they had to, then came back because human life still belonged to the surface. Fields needed tending. Animals needed pasture. Sunlight, trade, worship, and ordinary speech all pulled people upward again. Derinkuyu was not a rejection of the world above. It was a backup plan carved beneath it. Such a plan only works when many people share the same memory. Someone must know the passage. Someone must keep a shaft open. Someone must remember which door closes and which route leads toward air. Trust, not stone alone, makes refuge usable. That is why the question of what they were hiding from should remain open at this stage. They may have hidden from violence, from seizure, from religious pressure, from disorder, or from several of these at different times. The stone does not simplify the answer. It teaches a slower lesson. When instability repeats across generations, people do not only remember fear in stories, sometimes they carve a place where fear can be waited out. To ask what the people of Derinkuyu were hiding from is to stand at the edge of a question that should not be forced into a single answer too quickly. The underground city offers signs of defense, storage, water protection, air control, and organized movement, but it does not name one enemy. Its stone doors do not say whether the danger was a raid, a war, a wave of political disorder, a moment of religious pressure, or the repeated fear that food and families could be taken when the surface became unsafe. This is why the most careful answer must remain layered. Derinkuyu may have sheltered people from raiders who moved quickly through exposed settlements. It may have protected villagers during periods when armies passed through Cappadocia or when local power weakened. It may have helped Christian communities reduce their visibility in times of tension. It may also have protected grain, animals, tools, and water, because a community can be wounded not only by losing people, but by losing the supplies that allow people to live after danger has passed. These possibilities are not separate walls. They can overlap. A raid threatens bodies and food at the same time. Political instability can make roads dangerous, taxes harsher, protection uncertain, and local violence more likely. Religious pressure can become a danger to identity, worship, and ordinary family life. In a region crossed by larger histories, the same underground space could answer different pressures in different centuries. This makes Derinkuyu less like a locked mystery and more like a long record of human caution. The people who used it may not have been hiding from one thing only. They may have been hiding from the sudden collapse of predictability. That kind of fear is deeply human. Since the earliest beginnings of our species, survival has depended on reading the environment before the body is overwhelmed by it. A storm, a predator, a strange footprint, a season of hunger, a hostile group near water. Each danger may be different, but each asks the same question of the living body. Where can we go before it is too late? Later, settled communities faced different dangers, but the old question remained. A farmer does not only fear death in the moment, he fears the loss of seed, the loss of stored food, the loss of animals, the loss of the next season. A parent does not only fear the approach of strangers, she fears the place where children can be seen, heard, or separated. A village does not only fear an enemy's strength, it fears confusion, exposure, and the inability to continue afterward. Derinkuyu makes sense because it answers continuity as much as escape. To move underground was not simply to disappear, it was to keep the fragile center of life together. Breath, water, food, animals, tools, elders, children, and memory. That is why the idea of hiding should be understood carefully. Hiding can sound passive, as if people merely ran away from danger. But in Derinkuyu, hiding appears to have been organized. A hidden storeroom preserves labor. A hidden well preserves time. A hidden passage preserves movement. A stone door preserves the boundary between those who know the refuge and those who do not. These are active choices. They show preparation, not helplessness. The surface of Cappadocia could still be the place of farming, worship, trade, and daily speech, but the underground offered a second condition of life when the first became too exposed. The answer to what they were hiding from may therefore be broader than a name in a history book. They were likely hiding from the many ways settled life can be broken. Violence, seizure, uncertainty, and fear moving along the roads above them. Derinkuyu does not prove one final story of danger. It shows that the people who used it understood a colder truth, that the world above can be ordinary in the morning and unsafe by nightfall. The search for a single enemy can make Derinkuyu easier to imagine, but it can also make the story too small. Human beings often want fear to have a face, a named army, a named ruler, a named invasion, a single moment when people looked upward and decided to disappear beneath the earth. Yet the underground city may point towards something broader and more difficult to name. It may speak not only of one danger, but of a world where danger could not be predicted with confidence. That kind of pressure can shape a community just as strongly as an attack. If roads are sometimes safe and sometimes not, if authority sometimes protects and sometimes demands, if strangers sometimes trade and sometimes seize, ordinary life begins to carry a second layer of awareness. A field is still a field, but it is also exposed. A storehouse is still a place of food, but it is also a target. A village is still a home, but it is also visible. Derinkuyu makes sense inside that uneasy condition. It allowed people to keep living on the surface while preparing for the possibility that the surface might suddenly fail them. This is not a strange human response. It belongs to a pattern far older than Cappadocia. Early humans survived because they learned that danger was not always constant, but it could arrive quickly. The open land could be calm for hours, then change with weather, animals, hunger, or the presence of another group. The body had to live normally while also remembering where to go if normal life broke. Later, settled people inherited the same problem in a different form. Their dangers were not only natural, they were historical. A change of power could alter taxes, protection, religion, or security. A conflict far away could send movement along roads. A weakened border could make villages more vulnerable. A community did not need to know every political cause to feel the result in its own body. What mattered was whether children were safe, whether grain remained protected, whether water could still be reached, and whether the family could wait somewhere known until uncertainty passed. Derinkuyu was a response to unpredictability made physical. Its rooms and corridors did not have to belong to one event, because unpredictability itself can repeat. When danger is repeated, people do not prepare only for the last threat, they prepare for the shape of threat in general. A stone door does not ask who is outside, it closes because the boundary matters. A hidden room does not know whether the danger is military, political, religious, or criminal. It protects what has been placed inside. A narrow passage does not need to name an intruder. It slows any intruder who does not understand the space. This is why the underground city should be read as a system of reduced exposure. It turned a wide world into a managed world. It made the community smaller for a time, not because smallness was desirable, but because smallness could be defended. This carries a quiet evolutionary truth. Humans lost many forms of natural protection that other animals possess, or never had them in the first place. They could not rely on armor, claws or speed alone. What they developed instead was social memory, the ability to warn, teach, prepare, and build environments that changed the odds of survival. Derinkuyu is one of those altered environments. It shows the human body protected by human planning. The people above Cappadocia did not need to live in terror every day for the underground to matter. A refuge can remain unused for long periods and still shape the mind of a village. Its existence changes what people believe is possible when danger comes. It says that life does not have to scatter immediately. Food, water, animals, tools, and memory can be gathered below. The open world can become uncertain, but uncertainty does not have to mean complete helplessness. Perhaps this is what Derinkuyu was hiding from most deeply. Not one face in the distance, but the old knowledge that the surface of human life is thinner than it appears. Derinkuyu brings the question of hiding back to the human body, where all history finally has to be felt. People can name empires, raids, borders, and religious pressures, but beneath those names there is a simpler condition. Humans are exposed creatures. We are not protected by shells, heavy hides, or natural armor. We do not outrun every threat, and we do not survive alone as well as we survive together. What we have, and what our ancestors slowly depended on, is memory carried through a group. We remember danger. We warn one another. We prepare places before the next crisis arrives. Derinkuyu is a powerful example of that human replacement for lost strength. Instead of claws, there were tools. Instead of armor, there was stone. Instead of speed across open ground, there was a route downward into a world where movement could be controlled. This does not make the underground city primitive or desperate. It makes it deeply human. It shows people using the one protection our species has refined again and again, the ability to reshape the environment around our weakness. From the beginning, humans survived by turning places into advantages. A rock face could break the wind, a cave could limit approach, a fire could push back animals and cold, a group could listen while others slept. These were not heroic gestures. They were ordinary arrangements that made a fragile body harder to reach. Derinkuyu belongs to a later historical landscape, yet it carries the same logic into Cappadocia's volcanic stone. The open surface could feed people, but it could also reveal them. The underground could not replace life above, but it could reduce exposure when life above became dangerous. The people who used it may have hidden from violence, seizure, forced movement, or fear spreading along roads, but they were also hiding the future itself. Grain for later, water for waiting, animals for recovery, children who could grow, and habits that allowed the community to return to daylight. This is the quiet evolutionary depth of the place. Human beings survive not only by defending the present body, but by protecting tomorrow's body before it exists. A stored seed is a promise to the next season. A protected well is a promise that thirst will not decide everything. A known refuge is a promise that panic will not be the only answer when danger arrives. In Derinkuyu, these promises were carved rather than spoken. The stone held them in corridors, chambers, doors, shafts, and remembered routes. A community that could move below ground was not simply escaping. It was keeping its continuity close together. The old, the young, the useful, the sacred, the ordinary, and the necessary could be gathered into a smaller world until the larger one became less threatening. That act reveals both strength and loss. It reveals strength because people could cooperate, plan, dig, repair, and teach. It reveals loss because such preparation only makes sense in a world where safety is not guaranteed. The underground city is therefore not only a defense against people outside, it is a defense against the long human condition of exposure. The surface of the world has always offered both life and danger. Our ancestors learned to move between those truths, and later communities built that movement into walls, houses, villages, and, in Cappadocia, into depth. Derinkuyu asks us to see hiding not as cowardice, but as one of the oldest intelligent acts of the human species. To hide food is to believe in hunger before it comes. To hide water is to respect thirst before it speaks. To hide families is to understand that survival is measured not by pride, but by continuance. Whatever threats passed above Derinkuyu, the deeper pattern remains visible. People went underground because the human body is vulnerable, but human memory can prepare a place where vulnerability has a better chance to endure quietly. It is easy to imagine Derinkuyu as a hidden world of comfort, as though people once slipped beneath Cappadocia and entered a secret city protected from every trouble above. But the underground was not a dream of easy living. It was a difficult answer to a difficult surface. The deeper rooms, the narrow passages, the stone closures, the shafts of air, and the protected places for water and storage all suggest planning. But planning does not mean comfort. It means that hardship had been organized well enough to be endured. A community using Derinkuyu during danger would not have been stepping into a peaceful underground kingdom. It would have been entering a controlled refuge, where ordinary life became smaller, darker, slower, and more dependent on discipline. The surface world gave sunlight, fields, roads, speech, and movement. The underground took many of those things away, but in exchange it offered concealment, coolness, barriers, and time. That exchange was not romantic, it was practical. People may have accepted darkness because daylight had become too exposed. They may have accepted closeness because scattering above ground could be worse. They may have accepted waiting because waiting together was safer than running separately into uncertainty. This is the first correction Derinkuyu asks of us. The underground city should not be treated as a fantasy of hidden luxury. It was a survival machine made of stone, air, water, stored food, and shared memory. Human beings have always had to make these kinds of exchanges. At the beginning of our species, a cave was not beautiful because it was mysterious. It mattered because it cut the wind, narrowed the approach of danger, held warmth, and gave a group a place to rest. A fire was not only light, it was heat, protection, cooked food, and a center around which people could gather. A shelter always takes something and gives something back. It limits movement, but reduces exposure. It narrows the world, but makes it more knowable. Derinkuyu follows that old human rule in a later historical form. It offered safety by removing people from the visible surface, yet the price of that safety was the weight of the earth overhead. Imagine the practical reality without exaggeration. Light would have been limited, sound would have echoed. Smoke, animals, stored grain, damp stone, and human bodies could make the air feel heavy if the space was crowded or poorly managed. Movement through narrow routes would require patience. People could not simply wander as they might in a village street. They had to know where to go, when to move, and how not to block others. Food could be stored, but it could also run low. Water could be protected, but it had to be reached and shared. Animals could be kept alive, but they would bring noise, smell, heat, and the need for control. None of these details turn Derinkuyu into a place of misery alone. They make it real. They remind us that survival often depends on accepting a smaller freedom for a larger chance of continuance. A village above ground may feel open and alive, but openness can betray people during danger. A room underground may feel restrictive, but restriction can protect what matters most. This tension is central to the human story. Our ancestors survived not by living in perfect safety, but by moving between risk and shelter, hunger and storage, exposure and concealment. Later communities in Cappadocia inherited the same bodily truth with more complex tools and deeper stone. The underground city was not built to replace human life under the sun. It was there for moments when human life under the sun needed protection from forces moving across the surface. That is why its value lies in its difficulty. Derinkuyu shows people willing to reduce their world in order to preserve it. They did not need a legend to make that choice meaningful. They needed children who could remain hidden, food that could stay unseized, water that could remain near, and enough air for fear to be waited through. The underground was not paradise. It was a sober promise that life, though compressed, might still continue. Inside Derinkuyu, the senses would have carried history in a different way. Above ground, danger can be seen from a distance. Weather can be read in the sky, and the body has room to adjust itself to light, wind, and open space. Below ground, the same body must learn a smaller language. The eyes depend on weak lamps or familiar darkness. The ears notice footsteps, whispered voices, animals shifting, water being drawn, and echoes that make distance uncertain. The skin feels cool stone, still air, and the closeness of other people. The nose may catch smoke, stored grain, damp earth, animal breath, and the ordinary smell of bodies waiting in a place not made for comfort. These details are not meant to make the underground seem unbearable. They are meant to keep it truthful. A refuge can save life while still asking life to endure difficulty. Derinkuyu's value was not that it made people forget danger. Its value was that it gave danger a boundary. Within that boundary, the human body still needed care. Light would have been one of the clearest losses. Humans can move in darkness, but we are not creatures of darkness, in the way some animals are. We read faces, gestures, paths, and tools with our eyes. We judge space through sight. When light becomes limited, movement becomes slower and more deliberate. A known passage becomes important because the eye cannot easily invent trust. This returns us to an ancient human truth. From the earliest shelters, people survived by learning places before fear arrived. A cave is safer when its floor is known. A path is safer when its turns have been walked. A fire is safer when people know how smoke moves. In Derinkuyu, the same rule would have been stronger. To wait underground, people needed memory to replace the horizon. Sound would also have changed ordinary life. Stone can carry and distort noise. A small movement may feel larger when it echoes. A voice may need to soften, not only for secrecy, but for calm. If animals were kept below, their bodies would add another layer of difficulty. They might provide milk, labour, warmth, or future survival, yet they also needed space, food, and control. Stored grain and supplies could protect a community from hunger, but only if people managed them carefully. In a confined refuge, waste is not merely waste, it is risk. Smoke is not only smoke, it is a problem for breathing. A blocked route is not only inconvenient, it can change the safety of everyone behind it. Derinkuyu therefore reveals survival as a shared discipline. No person's body was completely private in such a place. One person's fear could spread. One person's mistake could affect air, food, or movement. This is why the underground city should be imagined with patience rather than spectacle. People may have sat close together, listened for signs from above, rationed supplies, calmed children, managed animals, and waited for someone trusted to decide when the surface could be entered again. None of this needs to be exaggerated. It is already enough. The real weight of Derinkuyu lies in the fact that ordinary human needs were compressed into stone. Breath, thirst, hunger, warmth, sleep, silence, and trust all had to fit beneath the earth. The body that once evolved under open skies had to accept a temporary life without them. That acceptance was not weakness. It was the old human bargain repeated once more. Give up comfort for protection. Give up distance for shelter. Give up the wide world for a smaller one where survival can be guarded until morning, or until history above becomes quiet enough to return. Such a place also reminds us that civilization did not remove the body from nature. Even under carved rock, people remain tied to heat, breath, smell, water, and darkness. The underground made those ties visible by stripping life down to what could not be ignored. The value of Derinkuyu is not found in a hidden treasure or in a lost royal name. It is found in the cold practicality of the place. The underground city tells us that people sometimes had to make life smaller in order to keep it from ending. That is a hard idea, but it is also a deeply human one. A community did not need to love darkness to use it. They did not need to prefer stone ceilings to open sky. They only needed to understand that, under certain pressures, the wide world above could become more dangerous than the narrow world below. When that happened, survival was not measured by comfort, pride, or beauty. It was measured by whether people could still breathe, drink, eat, wait, protect children, preserve animals, and return later to the fields and houses that made ordinary life possible. Derinkuyu's rooms and corridors make that truth visible. They show life reduced to essentials: air through shafts, water kept close, food stored in cool stone, movement guided through known passages, and danger held at a distance by doors and depth. This reduction was not failure, it was adaptation. From the earliest human beginnings, Survival often required accepting limits before the body could be protected. A group near a cave accepted less open space in exchange for shelter from weather or predators. People around a fire accepted the need to stay close, tend the flame, and organize rest around heat and light. Later, farmers accepted the limits of settlement because stored food and shared labor could support a more stable life. Derinkuyu belongs to that same long pattern. It shows that even after humans built villages, churches, roads, and communities, they still carried the old need to create a smaller, safer zone when exposure became too great. The underground did not make life larger, it made life more defensible. That may be the most honest way to see it. A family below ground may have lost the horizon for a time, but kept its children near. A village may have lost open movement, but kept grain from being seized. A community may have lost the easy rhythm of daylight, but kept water, animals, and memory together long enough for danger to pass. The cost was real, and because it was real, the decision to go underground becomes more meaningful, not less. People do not carve such spaces because darkness is romantic. They carve them because the surface has taught them caution. Every passage in Derinkuyu seems to carry that sober lesson. The earth could become a shield, but only if people accepted the burden of living inside the shield. The body still needed warmth, the mind still needed order, the group still needed trust. Without trust, the underground would be only confusion. With trust, it could become a temporary form of continuity. This is where Derinkuyu becomes more than an unusual archaeological site. It becomes a reminder that much of human history was not about conquest or display, but about preservation. The people who mattered most in such moments may never have been named. They were the ones who stored food carefully, remembered the route to water, kept children quiet, helped elders through narrow spaces, repaired shafts, watched animals, and waited without knowing exactly what would happen above. Their work was not glamorous, but it was the work that allowed life to continue. In the deepest human sense, civilization depends on that kind of work. It depends on people who prepare for seasons they cannot control, dangers they cannot fully predict, and losses they hope will not come. Derinkuyu shows this without needing to exaggerate. It does not prove that its users were always hunted. It does not prove one enemy or one dramatic night. It proves something calmer and more enduring. People understood that survival sometimes means compressing the world until it can be held. The open sky may be where human life feels most natural, but there are moments in history when the safest place is not the most natural one. In those moments, the measure of wisdom is not how high a people can build, but how carefully they can protect what must not be lost. Derinkuyu is powerful because it shows life made smaller, darker, and quieter, not to erase it, but to give it another chance to rise again. Underground places are often preserved by danger, but they are also changed by the fading of danger. Derinkuyu was useful because the surface could become uncertain, yet no refuge remains equally necessary forever. When roads grow safer, when political authority becomes more stable, when patterns of violence shift away, or when communities move, the need to withdraw below ground can slowly weaken. This does not mean the underground city suddenly lost all meaning. Human places rarely disappear in a single moment from the minds of those who know them. A room may continue to store food after it no longer shelters families. A passage may remain familiar even when fewer people use it. A shaft may stay open because older habits continue beyond the original fear. But over time, if the pressures that made depth essential become less frequent, the underground can pass from daily readiness into memory. This is one of the quiet ways history changes a place. The stone remains, but the urgency around the stone softens. Derinkuyu may have been used across different periods for different reasons, and that is why its abandonment should also be imagined with caution. It was not necessarily one dramatic farewell, not a final night when everyone climbed upward and never returned. More likely, use could have thinned gradually as the world above changed. Families may have found other forms of protection, villages may have shifted. Political control may have altered the risks of open life. New building habits, new economies, new roads, and new centres of power may have made older refuges less central. In human history, shelter always follows need. Early people returned to caves and rock shelters when those places answered the pressure of weather, animals, or movement. When conditions changed, a shelter could be left behind. not because it had failed, but because life had moved into another arrangement. Derinkuyu belongs to that same pattern. A place built for survival can become quieter when survival no longer depends on it in the same way. This does not make it useless. It becomes a stored possibility, then a memory, then perhaps a forgotten depth beneath ordinary ground. The people above may still know that spaces exist below, but knowledge can become uneven. One family remembers a room, another blocks an entrance. A child hears that there are tunnels but does not learn every route. A passage fills with dust or debris. A doorway becomes hidden by a later wall or floor. The underground does not need to vanish physically in order to vanish socially. It only needs to stop being used by enough people. That is how many human places fall silent. A path disappears under grass when feet stop repeating it. A well is forgotten when water is drawn elsewhere. A shelter loses its living meaning when no one teaches the next generation how and why to enter it. The old human dependence on remembered places works in both directions. Memory can preserve a refuge, but forgetting can return it to the earth. Derinkuyu's later story, then, is not only about decline, it is about changing relationships between danger, community, and space. As centuries passed, the surface world did not become perfectly safe, but the specific need for large underground refuge may have diminished for many people. Modern states, different patterns of settlement, changing technologies, and altered social life all reshaped what protection meant. A closed stone door was once a powerful boundary. Later, it might become an old feature in a landscape where people relied on other forms of security. A deep room once prepared for waiting could become a curiosity, a storage place, or a space no longer entered at all. The human body still needed shelter, water, food, and safety, just as it had from the beginning, but the way communities met those needs changed. This is one of the calm lessons Derinkuyu offers. Human beings do not only build because of fear, they also stop using certain protections when fear takes another shape. The underground city remained in the stone, but its role in life above could slowly loosen like a memory that no longer organizes the day, yet has not fully disappeared from the ground beneath it. A place can remain underfoot for a long time without being fully remembered. Derinkuyu helps us understand how this can happen. Underground rooms do not disappear in the same way wooden houses disappear. Stone may remain after voices, habits, and warnings fade. A passage can survive while the reason for entering it becomes unclear. A chamber can sit beneath a village while daily life continues above, with people farming, repairing houses, raising children, and walking across ground that once opened into a carefully prepared refuge. Forgetting is not always sudden. It can happen slowly, through fewer footsteps, fewer stories, fewer repairs, and fewer moments when people urgently need to go down. When a place is no longer central to survival, it can become ordinary, then obscure, then strange again. Derinkuyu's modern rediscovery and renewed attention belong to that strange return. What was once practical can later become archaeological. What was once known through habit must later be mapped, described, protected, and explained. Modern visitors may look at the underground city with wonder, but the people who used it in earlier times may have looked at it with a very different feeling. Caution, familiarity, duty, and the calm seriousness of a place meant to keep life intact. This difference matters. Archaeology often begins where living memory becomes incomplete. A room that once had a clear use may become a question. A tunnel that once guided frightened people may become a measured feature on a plan. A stone door that once separated danger from the vulnerable may become an object of study. The shift from use to discovery changes the meaning of the place, but it does not erase its older reality. Derinkuyu was not created so that later people could be amazed. It was created because earlier people had problems that required stone, depth, air, water, and organization. This brings us back to the beginning of human shelter. Early humans did not preserve places because they were interesting. They returned to them because they worked. A cave, a spring, a windbreak, a place where fire could be protected, a route away from danger. These mattered because the body remembered usefulness before it remembered beauty. Later, when settled communities carved underground refuges in Cappadocia, the same practical memory remained. The place had value while it helped people live. Once that value weakened, the stone could remain while the habit around it thinned. Modern attention reverses that process. Instead of a community moving through familiar darkness because it must, researchers, guides, and visitors move through the darkness because they are trying to understand what earlier necessity looked like. Tourism can make Derinkuyu visible to the world, but visibility also creates a risk of distortion. A hidden city can easily be turned into a spectacle, a puzzle, or a dramatic secret. The more careful view is quieter. Derinkuyu should be approached as a human place, shaped by real materials and real pressures, not as proof of a sensational story. Its rooms do not need exaggeration. Their importance lies in the fact that they survived long enough to let us see how people once prepared for uncertainty. The modern world often looks for written names, exact origins, and clean explanations, yet underground spaces do not always offer that kind of answer. They offer arrangement. They offer where. They offer the logic of air, storage, water, defense, and movement. They show that people once trusted the earth beneath them enough to make it part of community survival. In that way, rediscovery is not only the finding of a buried place, it is the return of attention to an old human skill, making safety out of landscape. From the earliest shelters to Cappadocia's carved depths, human beings have always left traces where vulnerability met planning. Derinkuyu was hidden, then remembered differently, then studied and visited as a rare survival of that long habit. The surface world changed, but the underground kept its quiet evidence. It waited without explaining itself fully, holding in stone the memory of people who had once needed a second world beneath the first. Across the world, human beings have often answered danger by building upward. They raised walls around towns, placed towers above gates, shaped fortresses on hills, and made high places into signs of power. Height gives warning. It lets the eye travel farther. It tells strangers that a community wants to be seen and defended at the same time. Derinkuyu leaves a different lesson. In Cappadocia, safety could turn downward. The land did not produce a fortress reaching into the air, but a hidden depth where people could remove themselves from sight. This does not make Derinkuyu the opposite of civilization. It shows another face of civilization, one that is less concerned with display and more concerned with endurance. A city wall says, "Here we stand." An underground refuge says, "Here we may continue even when standing openly becomes too dangerous." Both answers belong to human history, because human communities have always needed to manage exposure. The earliest shelters were not built to impress anyone. They were used because bodies needed warmth, cover, water, and rest. Later, as people settled into villages and then larger societies, shelter gained new meanings. It could express status, religion, government, wealth, or military control. But beneath those meanings, the old need remained. A wall, a roof, a cave, a tunnel, and a closed door all begin from the same fragile fact. The human body cannot survive every pressure in the open. Derinkuyu makes that fact visible by hiding it. It reminds us that some of the most important human spaces are not the ones designed to be admired from far away, but the ones designed to keep ordinary life from being broken. In many regions, fear left itself above ground as ramparts, watchtowers, castles, and fortified settlements. In Cappadocia, fear also left itself below ground as rooms, corridors, wells, air shafts, and stone doors. The difference is not only architectural, it is psychological. A tower assumes that distance matters. A tunnel assumes that control of approach matters. A high wall says danger must be stopped before it enters. A narrow underground passage says danger must be slowed, confused, and contained if it comes too close. These are different ways of thinking with space. Both depend on the same human ability to change the environment before the body is overwhelmed by it. This ability reaches back to the beginning of our species. Humans survived by learning that place could be used intelligently. A rock ledge could protect from wind. A cave could limit attack from several directions. A fire could create a small circle of warmth and warning. A remembered path could lead a group away from danger. Derinkuyu stands much later in time, yet it carries that ancestral intelligence into a settled historical landscape. It is not a return to the cave. It is a deliberate extension of the cave's logic, shaped by people who farmed, stored food, worshipped, traded, and lived within the pressures of a changing region. This is why Derinkuyu belongs in the larger history of human adaptation. It is not only a local curiosity. It is a reminder that human societies do not all protect themselves in the same direction. Some build toward visibility, some carve toward concealment, some depend on height, others on depth. Some make power visible, others make survival quiet. Cappadocia's underground cities show that history is not only written in monuments that rise above the land, it is also written in spaces where people lowered their bodies into darkness so that life could return later to daylight. The deeper lesson is calm but severe. Human beings have never been fully separate from vulnerability, no matter how complex their societies become. Tools, faith, villages, and empires can change the scale of danger, but they do not erase the need for air, water, food, shelter, and shared trust. Derinkuyu remains powerful because it turns those needs into architecture without pretending they are glorious. It shows that sometimes the wisest structure is not the one that reaches highest, but the one that knows how to protect the quiet center of life below. Derinkuyu does not need to be treated as a supernatural secret in order to feel profound. Its power is quieter than that. It is a place where ordinary human needs were carried into the earth and arranged with unusual care. Air was guided downward, water was protected, food could be stored, passages could be narrowed, stone doors could separate the known from the unknown. These facts are enough. They do not require an impossible civilization, a lost race, or a perfect answer carved into every wall. The underground city becomes more meaningful when it is allowed to remain human. It was made in a landscape where the rock could be cut, in a region where history could be unstable, by communities that needed more than imagination to survive. They needed tools, patience, memory, and trust. They needed to know that if the surface became dangerous, there was still a prepared place beneath it. This is the calm truth at the center of Derinkuyu. Survival is often less dramatic than legend, but more demanding than wonder. To prepare an underground refuge, people had to think beyond the present moment. They had to imagine thirst before thirst arrived, fear before fear entered the village, hunger before stored food was lost, and confusion before darkness filled with movement. That kind of preparation is one of the deep signatures of human life. From the earliest shelters used by our species, people survived by learning how to reduce exposure. A natural cave, a guarded fire, a known spring, a dry place above floodwater, a path remembered in the dark. All of these were ways of giving the fragile body a better chance. Derinkuyu belongs to a later world, but it carries the same old lesson into carved stone. The people who used it were not outside history. They lived with fields, animals, roads, faith, families, and the pressures of powers larger than themselves. Yet beneath those historical layers, the same biological truth remained. The human body needs air, water, rest, food, and the presence of others. Civilization changes the setting of those needs, but it does not erase them. In that sense, Derinkuyu is not only an archaeological curiosity, it is a mirror held below ground. It shows how much human life depends on things that are easy to overlook when the world feels safe. A well is not merely a feature, it is the possibility of waiting. A ventilation shaft is not merely engineering, it is breath made into architecture. A storage room is not merely empty space, it is a season protected from loss. A narrow passage is not merely a route, it is fear shaped into control. When seen this way, Derinkuyu becomes a record of adaptation rather than a puzzle demanding a sensational solution. It tells us that people did not always build to be remembered. Sometimes they built so they could remain alive without being seen. This is why caution is important. The question of who began Derinkuyu may never have one clean answer. The question of what they were hiding from may carry many answers layered across time. But uncertainty does not make the place meaningless. It makes it more honest. Human history is often made from incomplete evidence, careful comparison, and the willingness to say only what the traces can support. Derinkuyu asks for that kind of respect. It should not be forced to confess what it cannot prove. It should be listened to through what it does show: organized labor, repeated use, practical fear, and the deep human habit of preparing a refuge before the open world fails. The underground city does not glorify darkness. It does not suggest that humans belong below the earth. It shows something more balanced. People belong to the surface, yet they survive because they can imagine a shelter beyond the surface when life requires it. Derinkuyu is therefore not a story of escape from humanity. It is a story of humanity made visible by what it chose to protect in the dark. History is often told through rulers, wars, borders, and dates. But Derinkuyu asks us to lower our attention to a quieter level. Beneath Cappadocia, the most important story is not the glory of a king or the victory of an army. It is the protection of ordinary continuance. Someone had to think about water. Someone had to preserve food. Someone had to know where animals could be kept. Someone had to guide children through darkness, help older bodies move through narrow stone, and keep fear from spreading faster than the danger outside. These actions are not usually the center of historical memory, yet they are the actions that allow history to continue at all. Without people who store grain, repair passages, remember wells, and teach routes, the larger stories of civilizations become hollow. Derinkuyu reminds us that survival is built from small duties repeated with care. A city under the earth may seem extraordinary, but its deepest values are simple: breath, water, food, shelter, trust, and time. These are the same values that shaped human life from its beginning. Long before written histories, human groups survived because they protected what the body could not do without. They remembered where water could be found. They guarded fire. They returned to shelter. They learned that children, elders, tools, food, and knowledge all had to be kept close when the world became uncertain. Later societies became more complex, but they did not escape this foundation. Empires could rise, faiths could spread, roads could connect distant regions, and carved churches could appear in the soft stone of Cappadocia. Still, beneath every achievement, the body remained dependent on the same few conditions. Derinkuyu makes that dependence visible. It shows us that human intelligence is not only the intelligence of invention, conquest, or belief. It is also the intelligence of keeping life possible when conditions become narrow. This is an educational lesson, worth carrying gently. When we look at ancient places, it is easy to ask what is mysterious, what is shocking, or what has been hidden from us. Those questions can attract attention, but they can also pull us away from the more useful truth. The real wonder is often not that people were strange in the past. The real wonder is that they were recognizably human. They worried about food. They prepared for danger. They used the materials around them. They passed knowledge forward without always leaving written explanations behind. They made choices under pressure, not because they knew the future, but because they understood the cost of being unprepared. Derinkuyu does not teach fear for its own sake. It teaches respect for preparation. It teaches that a community is not only a group of people living near one another, it is a shared memory of how to protect what matters when the surface becomes difficult. In the underground city, this shared memory took physical form. Air shafts became care for unseen breath. Wells became care for waiting bodies. Storage rooms became care for seasons not yet arrived. Stone doors became care for those who needed a boundary between danger and life. The people connected to Derinkuyu may not have thought of themselves as leaving a lesson for the distant future. They were likely trying to meet the demands of their own world. Yet the lesson remains because the stone remains. It tells us that useful history is not only about what people built when they felt powerful, it is also about what they built when they knew they were vulnerable. This is why Derinkuyu should leave us with humility rather than spectacle. It asks us to see ordinary human preservation as a form of wisdom. To protect water is wisdom. To store food is wisdom. To remember a safe route is wisdom. To build a place where frightened people can wait together is wisdom. The underground city gives this wisdom a quiet shape beneath the ground. Derinkuyu brings us back to the question we began with, but it does not return us to the same place. At first, the underground city may seem to ask for a dramatic answer. Who dug so deep, and what were they hiding from? After moving through its stone corridors in thought, the question becomes slower. Perhaps Derinkuyu was not hiding one secret. Perhaps it was protecting many ordinary things that become precious when history turns unstable. Breath, water, stored food, animals, children, elders, tools, faith, memory, and the fragile habit of returning to daylight after fear has passed. Its builders and users may have belonged to more than one generation, more than one community, and more than one historical pressure. Some may have used the underground for storage. Some may have used it for shelter. Some may have strengthened it against danger. Some may have inherited it without knowing the first hands that cut the stone. That layered uncertainty should not disappoint us. It may be the most truthful thing about the place. Human life is rarely protected by one decision alone. It is protected by many small decisions repeated until they become tradition. From the beginning of our species, survival depended on this patient repetition. A safe hollow remembered, a fire guarded, a spring returned to, a path taught to children, a shelter improved after weather, hunger, or fear. Derinkuyu is not a simple cave from the deep past, and it should not be treated as one. It belongs to the historical landscape of Cappadocia, with its soft volcanic stone, its villages, its religious life, and its exposure to wider movements across Anatolia. Yet beneath all those historical details, it still carries the older human pattern. We are creatures who need the open world, but cannot always trust it. We need light, fields, roads, and neighbours, yet we also need walls, doors, remembered routes, and places where the body can be less exposed. Derinkuyu gives that contradiction a form. It is a city that does not rise to announce itself. It descends to protect what might otherwise be taken, scattered, or broken. Its silence is not empty. It is the silence of a place built for waiting. And waiting, in human history, is often more important than we admit. To wait safely through danger is to preserve the future without knowing it. To keep grain below ground is to believe there will be another season. To keep water close is to believe thirst can be endured. To guide people through darkness is to believe that fear does not have to become chaos. This is the value Derinkuyu can leave with us. It teaches that history is not only made by those who conquer the surface. It is also made by those who prepare quietly beneath it. It teaches that survival is not always bold, loud, or visible. Sometimes survival is narrow, dark, careful, and shared. The people connected to Derinkuyu may never give us every answer we want. Their names may remain missing. Their first motives may remain partly hidden. Their fears may have changed from one century to another. But the underground city still tells us something useful and honest. Human beings endure by shaping places around their vulnerability. They do not erase fear. They give it boundaries. They do not escape the body. They protect its breath, thirst, hunger, and need for trust. So when we imagine Derinkuyu beneath the quiet ground of Cappadocia, we should not only picture a mystery, we should picture a community lowering the fragile center of life into stone, not because darkness was home, but because daylight could not always be guaranteed. And if a whole city could be carved beneath the earth to keep life from disappearing, what part of human memory was Derinkuyu truly hiding from?